Yo, welcome to the channel. I'm Darren, and a lot of you guys asked me how I grade with CinePrint 35, so here's a video kind of explaining that. I do want to preface this with a few things. First off, I am not a professional colorist, so a lot of the things that I'm doing here, please don't take as like law. You can change things, you can do things yourself, you can research and find maybe a way that's better. If you do, please leave it in the comments. I would love to learn that. So everything I'm doing here is just what I've learned. You can do it whatever way you want to. Just wanted to say that. The second thing is I am editing this on a MacBook. So there are some settings here that I am doing that are specific for MacBook. It might be different for you on a Windows computer or whatever you're editing on. So just keep that in mind. The third thing I wanted to say is that I am editing in my kitchen. I do not have a better spot to do this at, so you may be echoey. You might hear dogs, doors, other things going. So just know that, that's why. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that all of the clips that I'm editing are filmed on my Blackmagic cinema camera, 6K full frame camera. So all of this is filmed on my DaVinci camera. It's all B-raw. The camera I'm shooting on right now is my Fujifilm X-T4. And I wanted to say that because Tom seemed to be a little bit more picky with the cameras that he chose to do the emulations for. I know that he has one for Blackmagic. I know that he has one for Sony. I know he has one for Fujifilm, but only for F-Log 2. So this camera that I'm shooting on only does F-Log 1, in which case I'd have to find some roundabout way to get that to work. I know that in his recent video, someone in the comments kind of said like, hey, what if I'm shooting in F-Log 1? What do I do? And he kind of just said to make a color space transform, but didn't really go any further into that. So if you are one of those people that uses a camera that he doesn't necessarily support off rip, just do your research, look into it a little bit more, find out what he suggests, kind of go from there. Maybe other people have figured it out. There's a lot of information out there. So yeah, with all of that being said, let's go ahead and dive into this. So I got 4 clips here on the timeline that we're gonna go ahead and color grade. One of the first things I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to turn off these proxies and use the camera originals. If you're using a Blackmagic camera, the proxies are great for editing. They're not great for color grading. I found that out real quick. I just got this camera, so I'm like learning it too. So we'll go ahead and open the gallery again. And then, okay, so now that we've set that, let's go ahead and click on this little gear icon and make sure our color management settings are correct. So Tom recommends to shoot in Rec. 709 Gamma 2.4. Now, when I did this and I exported the video that you can see, it's on YouTube, it's the one that I got most of these comments to make this video on. When I did this, it left kind of like a green cast in my shadows that I really hated. It wasn't until later that I used Rec. 709A that I realized that doing this is gonna give me true colors when I export. The Rec. 709A, I read, is kind of specific to MacBooks and Apple. So if you're using a Windows or whatever laptop you're using, it may be different. I would just look into it a little bit more, but for now I'm gonna leave it as Rec. 709A. If anyone else has any other suggestions, leave them in the comments. Okay, cool, so we set that. Let's go ahead and click cancel. And the next thing I'm gonna do is kind of talk about CinePrint 35 itself. So there are 3 film stocks here, and they each have 35mm and 16mm. The 16mm is going to give you a bit more of a grittier, grainier version, and then 35 is going to be a little bit more refined and a lot sharper. So depending on what you need, what the client wants, what you want, what the artistic style is calling for, you can kind of choose between the 2. Okay, cool. So now let's talk about the film stocks. So there are 3 in total, and we have Kodak 500T, and the T stands for tungsten balanced. So when you're shooting with like artificial lighting, specifically tungsten, maybe this is the film stock that you should use. You can kind of, the way that I kind of take this is you can use them in every scenario. I can use 500T outside if I wanted to, even though it's not technically balanced for it. It really just calls for whatever you need, whatever the shot needs. So there's 500T. Then he has Fujifilm 160T, which I think is really cool. I don't use it a whole lot. It's kind of a very specific color style, but I thought it was really cool that he kind of revived a dead film stock. That's really sick. And then the Kodak 250D. So 250D is daylight balanced, is probably the one you would want to use for outside. But again, you can use these in any scenario that you want to. You just got to kind of finesse it in certain ways. Okay, cool. So with that out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead and choose which one I wanna use here. So I'll go ahead and hover over these. 500T looks cool. 160T looks cool. It's a little more muted than what I want, so I'm not gonna choose that one. And then 250D. I think I'm just gonna use 250D. It's daylight, I'm shooting outside, it looks good. It's a little warm, so I may change that. Okay, cool. Right off rip, I applied it and we can see that there's a huge node tree. I don't know exactly what each node does, but I do mess with all of them and I kind of just adjust them based on what I like. So the first thing I'll do here is I'll make sure that my skin tones are correct. So I'll go down here, I'll turn on the qualifier and I'll hover over her skin tone. And you can kind of see that it's on the skin tone line right here, which is great because that's exactly where you want to be. General rule of thumb, set your skin tones first and then adjust accordingly. Unless the shot calls for an extremely red scenario, extremely green, extremely blue, you typically want to stay on the skin tone line. So I'll stay here, okay, cool. And then for the white balance, I'm actually just gonna bring it down cooler a little bit. So I'll go into my offset wheel in the primaries and I'll bring it down just ever so slightly. And I think that is good. Okay, cool. So if we look at that, I think that's awesome. Another tip that I also do a lot is I just put it in full frame. Just gives me a lot better view of the footage. And okay, cool. So we set the white balance. Next thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and go to my parade and I'll look at my exposure. I can see we're kind of clipping a little bit down here. So I'm gonna bring the exposure up just a bit. Now, he typically does this in the offset wheel. I don't prefer it that way. I learned a different way where if you go into your HDR wheels, click on these three little dots and you can set the color space that your camera is in. So I'll go ahead and do wide gamut Gen 4.5 and then I'll go to gamma and then I'll choose film Gen 5. Now what this allows is for you to adjust the exposure the way that your camera would. If I lower it, it'll get darker the same way that it would have on my camera. And if I raise it, same idea. I'm just gonna raise it a bit more. I think I'm good on 35. Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, cool. Sweet, and then we'll kind of move on to the pre. So this node right here is kind of specifically meant to give you a bit more dynamic range in your shot. So if I enable it, you'll see that everything becomes a lot more flat. So I'll go ahead and leave that enabled because I'm gonna go ahead and make it a little bit more contrasty later. And we'll come down here to halation, that's fine. These are the actual colors that we're seeing. So if I enable, disable these, you'll see that they're doing quite a bit. And then this right here, if we go back to our vector scope, we'll kind of see what it does. So we'll click on it, we'll enable it, and we'll kind of see that it brings our greens back to a little bit of a warmer side. So if we disable it, you'll see our greens kind of reach more towards the green side. I'm gonna go ahead and enable it, and I usually do enable this just because I don't like to see that green in my shadows. So I'll leave that enabled, and then we'll go to the grain 35 node, we'll open it, and we'll change it from HD to 4K, just because I'm gonna export this in 4K. Okay, cool. So, well, saturation I think is fine. I never usually mess with this kind of stuff. I think the saturation on a lot of these emulations is perfect. There may be certain scenarios where I think it may call for a little bit more, but those are few and far between. Then we'll go to our primaries. Our primaries I typically don't like messing with yet until I get the actual exposure of the image set in stone. So we'll go to contrast. Contrast here, he likes to adjust contrast this way, which isn't bad. I'm sure that there's an actual baked in way that he likes to do this and he has it specifically set up to do this. So I'll go ahead and use it just a little bit just to kind of show you what it does. We'll go ahead and bring it up. We'll leave it at 1280. I think that looks fine. HSV, enable that, disable that. It just kind of brings a little bit more life into our colors. And then the pastel, this one's kind of a take it or leave it kind of thing. This will kind of make your colors look a little bit more washed out. So if we disable it, you can kind of see the reds up here, they become a lot darker. And if we enable it again, you'll kind of see that they get washed out a bit more. I'm gonna leave it on. I like the look of it for this shot. What I'm gonna do after this is I'm gonna hit Option S and add another node. Now in this node, I'm gonna go over to my curves, and this is how I like to do contrast. It kind of gives it a little bit more of a filmic look to it and kind of doesn't make it look so harsh. So what I'll do is I'll turn on editable splines, which they're already on, cool. And then I'll bring my highlights down. So I'll bring it down into probably like right there. I like that. And then I'll bring my shadows up a bit more. Yeah, like right there. Okay, cool. And I should be doing this in my parade just that way I can see where my colors are lying. Okay, cool. So we'll bring down the shadows a bit. That looks good. And then we'll bring the highlights up a little bit. That's a little bit too much. I think that's fine right there. Bring the shadows down just a tad bit more. Okay, cool. So now I've done that. So if we disable it, you can see the image itself is just a lot brighter. It's a lot more contrasty, which again, maybe that's what you want. And if that is what you want, that's awesome. For me personally, I like to have a little bit more of a roll off in my highlights and my shadows. So I do it this way because it kind of allows me to have a little bit more of a, not a matted look, but a much more softer look to my image. So if I enable it again, you can still see that we're getting dark shadows, but they aren't in any way, shape, or form super contrasty, which is something that I really like. Cool. So we'll move on from that, and we'll look at the tint curves. So if we look at the tint curves, I already know what this does. It basically just makes my shadows a lot cooler. So if I enable it, you can kind of see it over here. I would just keep your eyes over here. So if I disable it, they become a little bit warmer. If I enable it, cooler. I typically leave this off. There are some scenarios where I have used it, but for the most cases, I just leave it off. I don't like my shadows to look like that. Cineon, this is just another way to color grade it for film. That's what it does to your image. I leave it off. Then we also have the warm node, which I typically try to bring down just a tad to like 350. And I think that's good. So if we look at that, that looks awesome. I'm actually gonna bring my exposure down just a bit more. So we'll go back to my HDR wheels. And I'll bring it down to like 20. There we go. Okay, cool. I think that's my finished look. I like that a lot. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. Obviously, if this wasn't for the video, I think I would probably spend more time than I need to. But yeah, for now, I think that's a good shot, so we'll leave it at that. Okay, so coming to my second clip now. I wanted to choose this one because I thought it gave like a pretty good balance of like daylight and shadows to kind of see what they do. I'm gonna go ahead and use Fujifilm 160T on this. I'm gonna try to use all of the film emulations. So if we go ahead and drop that onto our space, we can see that this node tree is just slightly different than the one we used for the 250D. So if we go over here, we can see most of the things are the same actually. There are a few things. We can see pre-split. We have a pre-contrast node, and then we also have a shadow node. A lot of these again are the same, but you can see the contrast is turned off and the pre-split is also turned off. So we'll go ahead and start with exposure. So let's look at our parade. Our parade looks pretty good actually. I think our exposure is pretty nicely done. I might bring it down just a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the color space again. And I'm gonna bring it down ever so slightly. Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, cool. So we'll do that. And then the next thing is that we'll go ahead and set our skin tones. Select the qualifier. Let's look at our skin tones, and it looks like they are right on the money. One of the things I really like about this Blackmagic camera is it seems to get skin tones perfectly. I have yet to adjust them super heavily or needed to adjust them actually at all. So that's been really cool. So let's look at the image in full. Right off bat, I can see that it's a bit cooler in the greens. I definitely want to bring the highlights down a little bit. They're just a little too bright for me. And then the shadows I think are in a good spot. So let's try to keep them that way. So knowing what we did on the first shot, let's go ahead and try to do that here. So I'll turn on the pre-split, see what that does. Seems to bring things a little bit to the cooler side. I'm gonna go ahead and leave that on. Yeah. I'm gonna leave that on. I'm also gonna turn on our pre-contrast node. I wanna do a little bit more contrast myself later. So grain 35, we're gonna go ahead and make that change from HD to 4K. And then saturation, again, I think saturation is fine. You don't ever wanna overdo that. Primaries, I think these are fine. We might put a little bit of blue in the shadow, but again, I wanna make sure that my exposure is set correctly. So let's turn on the contrast. Oh, that looks great. That looks really good, actually. I'm thoroughly surprised with that. That's awesome. Pastel. Ooh, okay. I think I'm gonna leave pastel off. Yeah, I think I'm gonna leave pastel off. That looks good. Okay. And then again, I'm gonna do my S curve. I wanna bring the highlights down just a bit. That's perfect. Let's bring these shadows up just a little bit. Awesome. Bring that down. Let's bring our highlights up. So if you see this right there in the highlights, you can see that it kind of brings it back just a little bit and kind of just, I don't know, again, to my eyes, that looks better. Do whatever you want. We'll go to shadow tone, see what that looks like. Don't like it, I'm gonna leave that off. And then I'm gonna go ahead and bring down the warmness just a tad. I'm gonna do this one to like 400. Yeah, I think that looks good. So now if we look at our image in full, this is what it looks like. I'm actually gonna bring the exposure down just a bit more. I lied. Okay, cool. Yeah, and nothing's clipping, everything looks great. Yeah, so here's the second clip. There wasn't a whole lot that needed to be done. With these film emulations, I'm finding that like it does about 90% of the legwork. There really is not a ton for you to do afterwards, unless you need to do some heavy like artistic style grading that would heavily change the way that it looks. Okay, cool, let's move on to the next one. Now these I got really excited for and already color graded, but I'll do it again. Let's go ahead and select 500T because that's the last one we haven't used yet. We'll bring it on the timeline, and right off rip, you can kind of see that 500T has a little bit of cooler shadows. I've noticed that like 160T is a little bit more desaturated. 250D is really punchy because of the daylight balance, and then 500T tends to be a bit cooler in the shadows, probably because it's for tungsten. So right off rip, let's look at our exposure. We can see that the reds are so low. That's probably just because most of this is all green. So let's go to exposure and let's adjust that just a little bit. I don't want to do it too much, but I do want to bring it down just a little bit. And there we go. I think that is perfect. I think that's good. Cool. And then for white balance, this is kind of just use your eye since there's no skin tones here for us to monitor. We'll go over here to our primaries, to the offset, and then typically like this big glob of white area, you want to see kind of go more towards the center. That's typically going to give you like a better white balance overall. So you'll see that if I bring it back over here towards the center, our colors kind of start to look a little bit more true. I think right there is good, but I do want to make it a bit warmer. I think that's good right there. Yeah. That's good. Okay, cool. So we'll move on from white balance to our pre-contrast node. We'll enable that. Everything here, we'll go ahead and enable that too, kind of bring the greens just ever so slightly down. And then we'll change our grain from HD to 4K. We'll exit the node. Saturation, I think again, is fine. Primaries, we may need to adjust a little bit, but I want to go to my contrast first. I can see it's at 1200. Let's bring it up to like 1250. I think that's good. HSV, the look, anything else here? Pastel, I think I'm probably, yeah, I'm gonna disable that. I just want to bring more color to the greens. I don't like the fact that they're kind of tealish. I want to bring them a little bit more towards the green side. And then after this, we'll hit Option S to make sure I do my S tone, my S curve. Bring that down. And we'll bring this up. Our shadows down just a little bit. Our highlights. Oh yeah, that's looking good. So if we disable that, it's like the slightest change, but you can just see it ever so slightly in the shadows, just a little bit. So we'll leave that enabled. The shadow tone, not digging it. And then yeah, that's kind of it. I actually kind of want to change the highlights a little bit. Let me see if I actually would want to do that. Let's go to the gain and let's bring it. Nope, don't like that. And yeah, so that's kind of the shot. I really like it. I think it's really cool. One of the really cool things about this is that you can kind of see the halation happening around here. And I think that's really sick. It's a lot more true to halation than CinePrint 16 was. When you use CinePrint 16, it tends to go like a little bit overboard sometimes. I would have to adjust the like transparency of it. But with this, I find that it's a lot more true and it's a lot cooler overall for the entire shot. Like there's not really much that you have to change with it. And since this is pretty much the same shot, the next one, I'm actually just gonna go ahead and copy and paste this one. So Command C and then Command V, and that brings us here. That is just a really sick looking shot. I'm gonna bring the exposure down a bit more. That's good. And then I think the white balance is fine. I'm actually gonna bring the highlights down just a bit. And I'm gonna do that here in my primaries. There we go. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that looks great. And then one other thing, I kind of purchased a couple of other things from other people who make film emulations. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a couple of those. If I go to lens over here, I'm gonna go ahead and do a blur. So if we disable that, it's subtle, but you can kind of see it right here on the edges. If I enable it, it'll kind of blur them out. And then the other thing I also wanted to do was a vignette. So we'll add another one, and we'll do a vignette on this one. Nice. So if we disable that, if we enable it, I just thought it was, I think that looks cool. I think it kind of gives a little bit more meaning to the center of the frame, which is the drink. So if we bring that full screen, one of the really cool things I like about this is that one of the characteristics of film is that it kind of takes off the sharpness. Like the images can be sharp, but because of the film and the way that it kind of captures it, it doesn't seem so clinical. And I feel like the emulation does a very good job of doing that. Like if you look at these corners here, they're sharp, but not in the way that like a digital image would be. And I think that's so cool. And then lastly, with these four shots color graded, we're gonna go in here. And one of the things that I learned along the way is let's do restrict, and then we'll set this to 48,000 because I filmed this at 24 frames per second. You typically wanna double that. And then if we go to advanced settings, we can come over here and choose our gamma tag to be what we set it in our timeline. So we'll go Rec 709A, and then we can go ahead and add this to the queue, save it, and then you can go ahead and render. When you set the gamma tag to Rec 709A, it's basically just so yeah, that's the way that I color grade using CinePrint 35. There's not a whole lot going on into it. The emulation itself does a ton of the legwork, like I said. So when you do apply these, go ahead and adjust them and tweak them to your liking. That's basically the way that I do it. I apply it, I see what it looks like right off rip, and then I go ahead and make those changes as I see fit. If you guys have any other questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I'd be more than happy to try to answer to the best of my ability. And then if you guys have any other tips, I'd love to learn. I'm always trying to get better at this. I think there's so much more for me to learn. So if you guys have anything else, please let me know. I'll try my best to respond to you guys. Take it easy, and I'll see you guys again soon.